The National Export Initiative in the United States, very clear goals. Now, I've spent 30 years in the private sector. Well, life was in the private sector before I went into government, where I've been now for almost a year. But I have never heard articulated in the private sector world in any country goals more specific and clear, as I heard President Obama convey through the National Export Initiative. And that was, number one, double exports over 5 years. That's a 15% compounded annual growth rate, if you look at it. Now, the good news in our context is the U.S. over the first 10 months of this year is growing its exports at a little over 17%. So it's off to a great start, but still a lot of work to do. The second objective here was to create 2 million well-paying jobs in the United States while supporting much more internationally. So let's go back to the newer fields we're talking about in the context of technology, particularly as you look at renewable energy, and give you an example out of that. If you take the example of solar energy, you have solar panels which are designed out of R&D labs in the United States, engineered in the United States, manufactured in the United States. But if you go global with that, how does it create employment outside? When we bring that technology into an India, it is distributed through distributors. It is installed through Indian employees installing it locally here, and it's maintained through Indian businesses working and collaborating with American businesses. That's the beauty of a global value chain or a supply chain which we aspire to work towards. And that's what we wanted to do. But going back to the National Export Initiative, 2 goals: double exports over 5 years, create 2 million jobs in the United States and several more million jobs worldwide. How do you do this? What are the tactics? What were the specific plans the administration was coming to and going with? And it is in this context, clearly, there were few marching orders, and that's where which is really what we call the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service, or the International Trade Administration, as you hear. And this is about increasing access to markets. So working bilaterally with countries to open markets so that there are no trade barriers or trade tariffs, and you have free flow of goods and services. The second one is making sure that the current trade acts and pacts which we have are adhered to, are followed. And that is to make sure that there are no hurdles coming in the way to the local businesses and exporting businesses, so that there are no barriers to trade. So ensuring free and fair markets becomes a huge, huge issue. How do you define free? How do you define fair? What are the labor standards you work to? What are the standard specifications for products you work? So those are the issues we deal with in the course of what we call commercial diplomacy. The third is to level the playing field. And the fourth, which is incredibly important, is making sure that there is access to credit to small and medium enterprises. Now, in speaking in bilateral conversations I've had with several of the ministers, your union ministers in Delhi, I know that continues to be a critical issue even to the Indian government, particularly when it comes to small and medium enterprises. It is so even in America, because here are a few little-known facts about the American commercial marketplace. We have 30 million companies in the United States. Of our 30 million companies, only 1% of 30 million, 280,000 companies, export. So when you're looking at a global world, and you come from Germany, and you look through, German exports as a percentage of German GDP is almost touching 40%. Exports as a percentage of US GDP is 12%. So when you look at doubling, and people say, wow, how do you double? It is possible. America has 12% of its GDP in exports. Most of Europe is 30% plus. Germany is close to 40%. Canada is 30%. And China is 25%. So it is eminently possible. But let's go back to the 280,000. We have only 280,000 people who export. And of those, 58% of businesses export to only one market. Just one market. So when you look at doubling, we knew it is immediately possible, and those of us, again, who had worked in the business side, we were doing this for a living, whether we did it for Johnson & Johnson or Pfizer or Warner Lambert. It was immaterial, but you were doing that. So how do you scale what you do commercially to the rest of the world became the challenge. And when you look through in this, obviously you fish where the fish are. Now there are cultural overtones, why things happen, why things don't happen. Look around the world. If you look at this country, you have companies, Unilever has been here forever, defines the marketplace, has done well. You look at, what is their origin? Dutch or British? Both these were colonial countries. Both these were maritime countries. Both these had small domestic markets. And perforce, they had to look at markets abroad. In the context of the United States, it was somewhat different. The United States had huge markets internally. The domestic markets were large, they were well structured, there was very little risk, and they had high profit margins. So the incentive to go was not there, nor were they culturally maritime inclined. So that was the overall context when you look at it. But now when you look at which markets to go to, and you look at India, 9%, 8-9% growth, or look at China and a 10% growth. And then you look at Europe at approximately 2% growth, or you look at the United States approximately 3% growth. Europe and US would rule for the growth rates of an India and a China. 36% of the world's population live in Asia. 95% of the world's consumers live outside the United States. An India and a China add an Australia and a New Zealand to their population every year. So whichever way you look at it, you can look at it financially, you can look at it economically, you can look at it demographically, it comes down to the fact that this is where the opportunities are. Now the issue is, how do you look at win-win propositions for both the countries? And that's exactly what President Obama was here to explore, and I had the privilege of being here a week before that, exploring with the business community and all the major business industrialists in this city, as also in Hyderabad, and meeting bilaterally in terms of, with the ministers, in terms of what can be done. Let me go back. The key to winning and achieving the national export initiative of President Obama is a simple one. It is about achieving collaboration across the world. It is about working to those win-win solutions. It is about connecting those technologies, products, and services which we have with the markets which need them. And when we do that, I think Dr. Rangaraj alluded to it, my shop, which has 1,500 trade professionals across the world, 109 cities in the United States, every state, with the exception of Alaska, which we cover through the mainland, or Delaware, which we cover through our Philadelphia office, it's a smaller state. We are there everywhere. We have a presence in 127 cities across 79 countries. India happens to be our biggest network in the sense of the number of offices we have in any country. We have 7 offices in India. Our second largest manpower strength of our trade specialists happens to be in India. The largest number of trade shows and trade missions which we sent out, we sent 39 of them last year. The largest number of those came to India, 6. You had the secretary, the undersecretary, the assistant secretary, and the president of the United States visit here. I know our colleagues may be very tired in India looking at many of these visitors coming from the US, but it doesn't happen because government wants to make this happen. It happens because businesses want to engage. Because these trade missions are businesses coming voluntarily, accompanied by government or led by government officials, not the other way about.